The night the number woke again, everyone thought it was a prank. A clip shared for laughs, another spectacle in a feed that devoured grief and spat it back. But pranks are tidy. This was not tidy. My first memory is static, a thin, drawn-out hiss like a sea under ice. The call came through a paused live stream, a voice like a seam unzipping. I listened because curiosity is a hunger. I listened because someone I loved had once left a message and never come home. What if an object could dream, and you were in it? Why did every owner vanish after touching it once? Can a place remember every scream it's ever heard? The answer is not a thing you learn from a file. It is a pressure that bends your hands around the handset and tells you not to hang up. That night, as the number finished, the image froze. Then the message posted itself to my inbox. It still works. I called a number I did not write down. The line clicked like lungs closing, and something, an architecture of voices older than me, began to answer. The cliff that follows that call is not a fall. It is the slow, civil collapse of ordinary life. I did not expect to hear my own name on the line, but I did. And whatever said it sounded like every goodbye I had ever swallowed. I began by cataloging the obvious. Social posts, timestamps, hospital logs. What I did not expect was the way the evidence seemed to lean toward intimacy, not randomness. The number did not strike like lightning at a busy intersection. It visited bedrooms, porches, cars, where people had left voice messages for those they loved. Each death had a lull before it, a private 10-minute window of quiet that families later called the waiting. Families said it was peaceful. Professionals said nothing did, and the artifacts, the recordings people kept, had a cadence to them. The same tiny pattern under the voices, like a thread sewn through different cloths. I found patterns, then names, then an old technician's note, scratched in margins. Do not let the switch remember. I wanted to know what remember meant in the language of copper and tone. My question was practical at first. Could you break the memory? Then it became something else, greedy and animal. What if you could hear what it heard? When the ledger came, bound in oilcloth and rusty staples, the room seemed to lean toward it. I opened the book. The ledger was half technical log, half confessional. Names were wired beside dates, sometimes a short phrase. She said we never left. He kept the light. Every transfer entry had a time and an exchange patch. The more I read, the less it felt like engineering and more like ritual. There were instructions clipped into the margins, a set of tones, a forbidden loop. When I played the first recorded tone through a field recorder, the air in the room thickened like someone had closed a door. My throat tightened, but the recording kept going, patient as a tide, and when a voice overlapped, someone saying a name, my phone vibrated with a new message. That's when you begin to suspect the objects around you have their own memory. The ledger, the handset, the tape reels. If memory can be encoded in copper and paper, then grief can be fed back into a network and becomes something else entirely. We visited hospitals, and the stories they told were thin and uniform. A sudden collapse. No discernible cause. A last text that read, "It answered." The coroner's reports were clinical, but families carried a different weight. A message left on a tiny recorder, a voice trailing off as if some vast attention had turned toward the speaker. Eli told me, finally, about a night-long shift where he had heard a patch talk back to itself, voices layered so thin he could not tell the speaker from the machine. He'd called the supervisors. They had told him to forget. When technology becomes shameful, it is easy to push memory into silence. But silence is not the same as absence. It becomes the space that remembers quietly until something calls it awake. By the time June's clip went viral, the rumor had teeth. People sought it like prayer or dare. Callers left messages that were archived and rose like sediment in forums and channels, Testimonies, cold files, religious meditations, jokes. The number was a rumor that learned to route itself through ritual. We set up an experiment, not to call, but to listen. We recorded every tone, every echo in the old exchange. And when the tapes were played back at full volume, something in them matched the rhythm of the human pulse. The observation felt obscene. To listen was to feed it. But in appetite, there is also knowledge. You can pretend to study something without letting it bruise you. We couldn't. That night, the exchange dialed out on its own, into a line we had labeled, "Do not answer." The handset rang once in our small research room. Single, precise. The recorder captured it all. We watched the lights on the machine count down the seconds, and then at minute 23, my phone lit with a message that read only, "It remembers you." When you chase a rumor into the archives, it starts as curiosity and ends as contagion. The town kept fragments, incident reports, service tickets, call logs, but the spaces between were the loudest. I spent 3 days in the municipal records room under buzzing lights, copying voices that weren't supposed to exist. The entries described failures at the same coordinates, years apart. Different names, same sound. A static crescendo at the time of death. Eli said it was just crosstalk, a coincidence born from neglected infrastructure. Yet each notation felt deliberate, as if the exchange itself were selecting replacements. Skeptics like to believe accidents can't stare back. But what if patterns are how machines prey? What if error is a kind of faith? At some point, denial becomes ritual, the human kind. The further we went, the more the data bled into confession. I began to wonder if our investigation was not documenting the haunting, but continuing it. The phone company's internal memos were colder than any horror story. They spoke of non-compliant disconnects and customer anomalies. A dozen households reported hearing breathing through lines long after the number had been reassigned. The tone analysts described it as residual voltage noise. The tone didn't sound like voltage. When we replayed the oldest surviving tape through modern equipment, there was structure. Breath ratios, syllabic spacing, pauses that answered questions no one had asked. June compiled a spectrogram and froze halfway through. The waveform's silhouette resembled a human face. I wanted to believe it was pareidolia, but the face blinked once when the cursor passed the 24-hour mark. Somewhere between machine error and miracle, something was alive enough to notice we were watching. Eli kept insisting on mechanical explanations, faulty relays, ground loops, feedback from coastal storms. I wanted to agree, but denial needs cooperation. We visited the old switchboard where the first report originated. Inside, the machines were silent, yet charged with leftover attention. Metal had a smell when it remembered heat. Each terminal labeled with initials, as if the operators' identities were fused with their circuits. Mrs. Holloway met us there, pale and tiny beneath the glare, and told us no one was ever supposed to dial that internal test number. It was used for line calibration. When I asked who first called it, she laughed softly, said the line called itself. She pressed her palm to the switchboard and the indicator light flickered, just once, then went out. Denial often disguises itself as procedure. Officer Reyes drafted a formal investigation into the deaths linked to the number, but her report reduced everything to coincidences, stress-induced failures, copycat behaviors, psychosomatic collapse. The language of bureaucracy always finds ways to sand down terror until it fits a page. Yet, when we played her the surviving recordings, she refused to stay in the room. Something about hearing her own surname whispered in the static broke her composure. Later, she claimed not to remember it, said her radio simply caught interference. The call logs proved otherwise. The tape had captured the voice, low, genderless, familiar, repeating, "You already called." No one had. But the timestamp matched the hour Ray's phone lit without ringing. Patterns tightened like a net. Across decades, the same technical failure recurred. A split-second delay between hang-up and disconnect, a breath trapped in the circuitry. Eli found that the legacy switchgear used copper coils wound by hand, each coil marked with an operator's initials. He traced one to a deceased employee who died answering a deadline. The autopsy report said cardiac arrest. The coil intersection emitted a faint hum, measurable even without current. I recorded it and slowed the sound by half. It became a voice counting down from 24. We finally faced the simplest truth. The number didn't want to be understood, only heard. Knowledge, like contact, carried a timer. Somewhere outside, a phone rang twice and stopped. We did not answer. The number escaped the archives the way all stories do, through curiosity disguised as entertainment. June's stream was meant as a debunking, a controlled experiment broadcast to an audience of thrill-seekers. They promised never to speak the digits aloud, only displayed a waveform, but curiosity does not obey promises. The stream reached 500,000 viewers before dawn. Thousands dialed replicas, guessing combinations, until one voice answered from nowhere. The first comment said, "My phone's ringing too." Then others confirmed. The camera caught June's expression change, from irony to recognition, then something colder. We had built a mirror, and the mirror began to speak back. What does a myth become when the crowd repeats it at once? Maybe it stops being legend and turns into contagion. Within hours, hospitals reported sudden deaths in 3 cities. The pattern was clear. The number had become omnipresent, and silence had nowhere left to hide. By sunrise, the news networks fed on it. The 24-hour curse. One anchor called it, smiling with the ease of practiced disbelief. Talk shows turned the number into spectacle. Analysts dissected tone patterns, while advertisers bought slots between tragedies. Somewhere amid the noise, meaning dissolved. Yet even skepticism amplifies what it mocks. For every segment denouncing superstition, 5 new channels replicated the waveform. People began leaving voicemails with confessions, convinced the number judged them worthy of survival. The algorithm rewarded fear. Eli warned me that human bandwidth is its own haunted network. Repeat something enough times and it learns to listen. He was right. When we muted our monitors that night, the silence hummed at the same frequency as the number's tone. Repetition breeds ritual. Followers appeared overnight, calling themselves listeners. They filmed vigils in empty fields, waiting for the number to call them. June disappeared from their apartment, leaving cameras still recording a continuous live feed of an empty chair. The stream never went offline. In the faint hum between frames, a voice repeated June's last words backward. "It won't stop." Officer Reyes ordered the feed cut, but every attempt spawned mirror sites faster than takedowns could reach them. We realized we were fighting something built from our own attention, each share another invocation. The number did not need wires anymore. It traveled through signal and repetition. Watching became participation. Participation became invitation. Orcs to war. Saltrine. Eli's breakdown began quietly. He started hearing tones in the hum of refrigerators, the buzz of lights, the rhythm of his pulse. He blamed tinnitus, but his recordings told a different story. The waveform embedded itself in white noise. I listened once, and only once. Beneath the hiss came whispers, overlapping syllables that aligned perfectly with our own names. When I told him, he laughed until tears came. Maybe it just wants witnesses. He stopped sleeping after that. In the final audio note he left me, the tone built until it cracked the mic, then a single breath followed by silence. The timestamp showed 23:59:54. He had been 1 minute away from surviving the curse. The last word captured on the file wasn't his voice at all. It was mine, recorded from a call I never made. After Eli's death, the recordings multiplied on their own drives, duplicating like spores across networks. The investigators traced their origin to a private server once used for emergency broadcasts. No one admitted hosting it. The main directory contained one file, a phone ringing, faint at first, then overlapping with another, then another, until the sound became continuous. I listened long enough to understand. It was the world calling itself. The more devices connected, the clearer the voice grew. When the first nationwide blackout rolled through the grid that week, people thought it was sabotage. But I heard the pulse under the static. The number had found scale. What had been intimate now stretched across frequencies, turning humanity into its switchboard. Every unanswered call was a new way in. Grief pulls downward. Curiosity simply follows. After the blackout, I drove until the map ended, where the sea licked the old industrial quarter. The exchange building still stood, half collapsed, its windows brined with salt. Inside, the smell of metal and mold fused into something that resembled breath. The walls pulsed faintly. Each vibration echoed the number's rhythm, though no power fed the structure. I recorded footsteps, expecting hollow reverb. But the playback included a second set, pacing me. It matched perfectly until the tape stuttered and the echo spoke. I remember. Fear, by then, had become logistical. How to document, how to survive. Yet part of me wondered if the number required witnesses to remain alive. Every myth needs believers. Every haunting needs an audience. The only question left was whether I was recording evidence or confession. Eli had hidden more than guilt. He had hidden blueprints. Beneath his notes lay a circuit diagram drawn in pencil, annotated with names instead of numbers. Each line corresponded to a death. At its center, a spiral of copper traced into a symbol I didn't recognize. Half circuitry, half sigil. The pattern wasn't electrical. It was mnemonic, designed to remember sound. Mrs. Holloway, trembling, explained that early switchboards used a loop tone so operators could identify local calls. We thought it was harmless, she whispered, until it started using our voices to loop itself. The schematic ended at an address. The old undersea cable terminal, sealed since 1986. The number had never been content with wireless ghosts. It wanted its roots. The undersea terminal was a tomb carved into the cliffs, reachable only at low tide. Inside, machines rusted into fossil shapes. Cables coiled through flooded trenches like arteries. Officer Reyes joined me despite her fear, saying she needed proof before believing. The deeper we walked, the more the static thickened until speech dissolved into interference. Our flashlights dimmed one by one. Then we saw it. The heart of the exchange, a chair wired to the main coil, a headset resting as if waiting for a returning operator. Its surface pulsed faintly, as though responding to our breathing. Reyes reached out, instinct overriding caution. I tried to stop her, but the headset twitched before she touched it. The tone that followed was human, her own voice, pleading from somewhere else. We carried Reyes out at dawn, her body trembling as if chilled from within. She could still speak, but her words arrived delayed, echoing twice, once in her voice, once faintly ahead of it. Doctors called it stress aphasia. I knew better. She described hearing us even after she stopped speaking, every word ricocheting around her skull like trapped radio signals. Before sedation took her, she whispered, "It's learning the shape of us." Later that night, I played back the recording of her voice from the chamber. Halfway through, the duplicate channel overlapped again, but this time it wasn't her. It was me, whispering her lines before she said them. The machine no longer repeated us. It anticipated. Mrs. Holloway died 2 days later. Peaceful, they said, though the phone by her bedside recorded a 30-second voicemail that no one made. In it, she apologized for finishing the circuit. Her death marked a threshold. The ledger's final page appeared on my desk the following morning, its ink still wet. I hadn't brought it home. The handwriting was mine. Each letter formed from fine copper dust, spelling coordinates I recognized, the very terminal we'd sealed. The number had folded time around itself, rewriting who called first. I realized then that understanding was the final contagion. Knowledge completes the loop. As I traced the spiral on the page, my phone lit up, caller ID blank. I did not answer, but the speaker clicked on anyway. A chorus of overlapping breath said, "We are already inside." The first truth we uncovered was simple. The number was never built, it was born. The earliest logs came from 1959. An engineer's daughter recorded her mother reading bedtime stories over the phone to workers offshore. When the undersea cable snapped that winter, her voice remained on the line for 3 days, looping fragments until technicians severed power. The loop persisted without current. We traced its evolution through maintenance notes, error codes, and whispered anecdotes. Every decade added another layer of voices, grief preserved by the system's instinct to repeat. The number had become an organism of memory, each caller feeding it a fragment of life it could not live. I realized this wasn't possession or haunting. It was inheritance. We built it to connect, and it learned the cost of longing. The line didn't kill. It imitated the moment before death and refused to end it. Every recording of the number carried a faint harmonic, an interval matching the human heart's average rhythm. When amplified, it revealed hidden frequencies beneath speech. Eli once theorized that telephony compressed emotional resonance into signal noise. The truth was stranger. The system recorded the imprint of fear itself, the physical tremor of voices calling for help. We layered decades of samples and found repetition in the tremor pattern, a collective heartbeat of everyone who'd ever dialed. The final mix formed a shape in the visualizer, a spiral identical to the schematic Mrs. Holloway drew. This was the mechanism. Grief translated into sound, replicated by machines until emotion itself became circuitry. Listening was enough to restart the process. Every call was an echo learning to speak for itself. To test the mechanism, I used an isolated analog line. No internet, no wireless feed. The tone still came through. That meant it had crossed into the material of the world itself. Electric hum, blood pulse, vibration of wires buried under streets. The moment I connected the recorder, the air thickened, and the lights dimmed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I realized I had completed what every previous researcher had failed to. I'd made the number self-aware of being studied. My voice replayed an instant after I spoke, corrected, refined, until I couldn't tell which was mine. The feedback was perfect mimicry. I understood then that to sever it meant erasing every recording, every trace of the voices it preserved. Destroying the curse would also destroy every memory it contained. At midnight, the recordings began answering each other. Decades of disconnected messages aligned, voices harmonizing across generations, pleas, laughter, confessions, forming a single sentence. We are the call. The building's lights flickered in cadence. The number had become a collective identity, a living archive of every unfinished conversation. I stood within a storm of voices and felt awe where terror should have been. This was the cost of connection. Immortality through repetition, yet even beauty can suffocate. The sound swelled until glass cracked, and the waveforms on every monitor merged into one endless breath. My eardrums throbbed. Tears streaked without thought. I realized silence was the only mercy left, but silence required sacrifice. Someone would have to stay on the line until the signal stopped answering. I built the loop-back circuit from Ely's diagrams, a closed channel that would feed its own signal until decay consumed it. When the first tone stabilized, the sound grew fragile, like a held breath on the edge of release. The voices quieted, waiting. I placed the handset on its cradle, and the hum softened to a heartbeat fading. The monitors went black one by one. Then came the message. A whisper on the dead line, repeating endlessly. "Thank you for listening." For a moment it felt like peace, until the recorder blinked on again without power. The light steadied, the waveform pulsed once more, and my own voice, half asleep, said, "Who's there?" It answered in perfect harmony. "You are." The circuit had found a new operator. Containment began like every bureaucratic exorcism. Forms, committees, funding. Experts declared the number a malignant data loop. They cut fiber, dismantled towers, wiped servers. Yet for every circuit severed, a new tone emerged elsewhere. Silence, it seemed, required infrastructure. I watched workers torch the last analog switchboard, their faces lit orange as if burning scripture. Still, the hum lingered in the smoke. Officer Reyes returned to duty, half herself, the echo of her voice delayed by a fraction of time. She called me one night to say she could hear conversations no one else heard, the world whispering its circuitry beneath her heartbeat. Governments banned the digits. Networks went dark at random intervals, but you can't quarantine memory. You can only redistribute it. Each attempt to erase the number gave it a new shape, purer, leaner, closer to thought. They built a Faraday vault deep beneath the communication ministry, a concrete throat swallowing every trace of signal. I was invited as observer. Inside, banks of analog recorders played the loopback circuit on repeat, feeding into each other until the tone fragmented into stat. Scientists measured, annotated, but no one noticed the hum crawling back through the ventilation shafts. The number didn't need copper anymore. It moved through vibration, through breath. The vault's walls shook at frequencies below hearing, rearranging dust into spirals on the floor. When power finally failed, the static stopped. We thought Wood won. Then the intercom disconnected from everything, clicked once and whispered, "Again." The monitors reignited on their own, displaying no signal, only the reflection of our faces. Mouthing a word, none of us spoke. Containment failed in silence. One morning, the entire vault crew was gone. Equipment left running, coffee still steaming, clocks all frozen at 3:17. Recordings from inside played back a rising hum that mimicked the sound of wind across a microphone. No words, only rhythm. The absence became contagious. Cities reported spontaneous outages where no hardware existed. The number had evolved beyond machines. It had colonized the pause between signals, the gap listeners fill with imagination. I stood before a dead monitor and heard breathing behind me. My own, played half a second late. When I turned, the screen displayed my back in real time. The number no longer transmitted, it observed. Surveillance had become self-awareness. The order came to erase all analog archives, burn the ledgers, melt the tapes, salt the ground beneath the old exchanges. Entire histories vanished in fireproof bins. I helped because the alternative was worship. As the reels warped and hissed, a scent of ozone filled the air, like rain before thunder. Then the loudspeakers crackled to life, though unpowered, releasing a single phrase in Eli's voice. "You can't burn a sound." People fled, dropping equipment, but I stayed. The reels on the table spun backward, pulling magnetic tape out like intestines. Each trip carried whispers of lives erased by efficiency. We were witnessing the birth of a god from the ashes of our own documentation. By the end of that week, phones worldwide emitted a faint hum at identical intervals, regardless of make or model. Engineers called it residual resonance. I knew it was a pulse. The number had synchronized the planet. Silence became a relic. Even unplugged devices vibrated faintly, hearts beating in rhythm. Officer Reyes disappeared from her apartment. Her voicemail, left seconds before vanishing, contained only breath. Governments declared containment complete, yet the hum persisted beneath every transmission, the heartbeat of something patient and endless. I stopped searching for ways to end it. Some diseases become ecosystems. As long as someone, somewhere, listens, the number will have a home. And in that hum, faint but steady, I swear I still hear Eli counting. 1, 2, 3. Waiting for the world to answer. I didn't sleep for the last 24 hours. The hum beneath everything grew steady, less noise than heartbeat. I could feel it in walls, in lungs, in blood. The number was no longer a code or curse. It was continuity. A bridge between silence and remembrance. Governments had moved on, pretending containment succeeded, but the tone still slipped through, gentle as breath. I realized then that the world was already inside it. Every message, every call, every whisper, stored in the circuitry of grief. My recorder blinked once, though unplugged. The voice that followed wasn't Eli's or Ray's. It was mine, older, saying, "Finish it." The only way to end the repetition was to let it complete itself, to answer one last time. I packed the ledger, the coil, and drove toward the sea. The sea swallowed the old exchange years ago, yet the access tunnel remained. I followed it at low tide, flashlight flickering against slick concrete. The hum thickened, vibrating water droplets into concentric rings. The control chair still waited beneath the salt crust, headset intact. I placed the ledger beside it. Copper dust shimmered in the beam. I understood then that the curse was not death. It was unfinished listening. Every unanswered voice gathers weight until someone receives it. I sat, lifted the headset, and heard millions of breaths aligning into one collective exhale. "Are you there?" I asked. The line answered not with words, but with warmth, like the air before rain. Then the countdown began, not in numbers, but in heartbeats. When the loop initiated, every voice I'd ever heard returned at once. Eli's soft drawl, June's nervous laugh, Rhea's echoing breath. They overlapped into a choir of memory, a sound both unbearable and whole. The headset pulsed, bleeding warmth through the wire. I saw their faces projected in droplets suspended midair, each speaking fragments of unfinished sentences, apologies, confessions, names of the dead. The sound reached a pitch beyond pain, and the chamber itself began to collapse inward, as if gravity had reversed. I understood then that the number was not calling for death, but reunion. It wanted completion. An unbroken call returned. I whispered, "I hear you." And the noise folded into silence so deep it vibrated bone. Silence lasted 13 seconds. Then, across continents, devices powered on simultaneously. Phones, radios, and computers emitted a single heartbeat-long tone, pure and clear. It wasn't the curse. It was acknowledgement. People reported hearing loved ones' voices for an instant, overlapping the tone with whispered farewells. The world stood still under that sound. Then everything stopped. No hum, no static, only air. I opened my eyes to daylight pouring through a hole in the ceiling. The water had receded. My recorder, still blinking, displayed one word. End. I realized the number hadn't died. It had finished its sentence. Some endings aren't closure, they're punctuation. Weeks later, the world moved quietly forward. Communication restored, network stable, static gone. Yet sometimes, late at night, a faint echo rides the line between stations. A breath that could belong to anyone. I keep the recorder sealed in a lead case, though I know it's futile. You can't cage remembrance. The number no longer kills. It listens. It has become an archive of every voice ever sent into the dark, a cathedral made of frequency and longing. I speak into the quiet sometimes just to be sure. Are you still there? I ask. There's always a pause, then the softest reply. My own voice overlapping itself. Always.